Hey, what's going on there, guys? I'm back here today with another deck tech for you. Today we're going to be taking a look at a modern deck, and it's Esper Gifts. So Esper Gifts is a three-color blue, black, and white control-based deck that plays around Gifts Ungiven, and with it we can search for different card packages based on what we're playing up against and what the given board state is whenever we're casting it. Gifts Ungiven also allows us to select two cards, and we can go and select Unburial Rites and one of our big fatty creatures. We can put both of those into the graveyard because our opponent has to select both of those cards. And then the following turn we can go and reanimate with the flashback of Unburial Rites. So before we actually get to taking a look at everything that we have in this deck, if you guys have any suggestions for decks that you would like to see, please leave them down in the comments below and I'll take it into consideration for future deck techs. And also be sure to check out all of the playlists in the description down below where I have all the previous decks that I covered on the channel archived for you. So starting off with our creatures here, we have Snapcaster Mage is a 3-of. So Snapcaster Mage is awesome because he allows us to recur spot removal, things like Go for the Throat, Dismember, Doomblade, and Path to Exile. He allows us to flash back things like counter spells and also board wiping whenever it comes up to the heavy aggro matchups. So ultimately, he gives us more value out of the spells that we're actually playing in our deck. Equally, he is awesome for Gifts Ungiven because we can go and we can search up for like 3 spot removal elements and then Snapcaster Mage. So we either get 2 spot removal elements or one of them and Snapcaster Mage in our hand, which he can recur any of the ones that are in the grave from that point. But Snapcaster Mage is just really awesome for being able to recur spells, and also as one of the 4 cards or up to 4 cards that we're going to be selecting with Gifts Ungiven and manipulating to get an advantage over our opponent. I have 2 Spellskite in the deck. So Spellskite is awesome because it's a 0/4 blocker that is really just nice when it comes to like the early game. It's really good for matchups like Affinity, Infect, and Boggle, where Affinity, they can't really play around Arcbound Ravager just because we can redirect the modular if it comes to triggering, if we kill off their Arcbound Ravager and then the trigger's put on the stack and they're trying to put it on one of their creatures. We can just redirect it with either paying 1 blue or 2 life, so they don't have the benefit of being able to move around their +1/+1 counters. Up against Infect, all of their giant growth type spells are going to be redirected to our Spellskite, and generally with the Infect matchup we don't have to worry about life totals pretty much at all, so we can just go and start shifting all of the giant growth spells onto Spellskite pretty effectively. And up against like Boggle, we can just start shifting the enchantments on the Spellskite. Spellskite is also really good at protecting our own creatures as well, so when we go and reanimate something like Elesh, Norn, or Sphinx of the Steel Wind, if our opponent has a means of getting rid of them, we can just redirect that target onto Spellskite, and then we don't have to worry about having to find a way to either like reanimate our creature again or just find another creature because it's been like Path to Exile or something like that. So Spellskite has a dual purpose of either being hate or just protection for ourselves. I have 3 Kitchen Finks, so whenever it enters the battlefield we gain 2 life, and it has Persist. It's just pretty simple, and it's an easy way to gain back life. It keeps us in for any of the really aggressive matchups. It's also a pretty nice blocker up against like aggro-based decks. So the Persist allows us to gain back a decent bit of life and still keep a blocker onto the board that can at least do something while we are trying to find other things, while we're trying to stall it out and get to like a board wipe or something like that. I have 1 Sun Titan, so Sun Titan of course interacts with things like Snapcaster Mage, Kitchen Finks, Spellskite, also interacts with Ghost Quarter that we have in the land base, so if we need to keep on blowing up lands we can keep on going for the Ghost Quarter, and we can start getting rid of our opponents like utility lands, Urza lands, man lands, any stuff like that, anything that they could get like a pretty big value out of still having around. But the Sun Titan is a nice way to just keep on getting back 3 converted mana cost or less cards every time he swings in and whenever he comes in to the battlefield. He can also go and get us back Liliana of the Veil if it happens to be in our graveyard as well, which is pretty nice. I have one Elesh, Norn, and Cenobite, so Vigilance and other creatures you control get +2/+2. Creatures your opponents control get -2/-2. So it's an easy way to deal with like a whole lot of aggressive decks. Infect, it pretty much shuts down Infect. It's also going to be really, really nice up against Affinity. With Affinity, it is not going to allow them to activate their Inkmoth Nexus, so it's an easy way to just kind of deal with that whenever we put it onto the board. They have to find a way to remove it. If they're running like Dispatch or something like that, they might be able to just kind of squeeze something in and squeak through and get rid of the Elesh Norn. But for a lot of decks that run a lot of really cheap creatures, it can pretty much shut them out. So that's exactly what we want to do with Elesh Norn. It also makes things like Kitchen Finks and like Snapcaster Mage, like things that weren't really that big, a little bit bigger now. So it helps us to kind of just match the pieces there and just kind of really get in for our swings. I have one Sphinx of the Steel Wind, so Flying First Strike, Vigilance, Lifelink, Pro Red, and Pro Green. So Sphinx of the Steel Wind is just an easy way to get back life. Iona is good, but at the same time, she's not like really as impressive. I like the hate for specific colors, but for like tricolors and stuff like that, sometimes your opponent might be able to still get around Iona pretty easily, so she hasn't been as impressive lately as she was before, so I decided to go with Sphinx of the Steel Wind, and I've really been liking it. The Vigilance lifelink is pretty nice on top of a flying creature. The First Strike also gets there pretty well also, so it's definitely really nice to have a creature that is a 6-power First Striker that is going to stick around and can block things like Wormcoil Engine and just be able to swing and gain us back life every single turn. I have 2 Liliana of the Veil, which Liliana is going to allow us to interact with our creatures that we have. So if we have anything in our hand that we need to put into our graveyard, we can discard it with the +1. The -2 forces the target player to sack a creature, so up against like things like Boggle, if we need to force our opponent to sack something, we can go for that. Anything that is going to put out some formidable creatures, then not like very many of them consistently, we can go and use Liliana to the extent of just forcing them to sack consistently. So the Liliana is nice for that. I think the biggest utility is probably just forcing to discard with her, just to be able to put creatures and things that we want into our graveyard. For our removal that we have, I have a 3-of for Path to Exile. So exile target creature, its controller gets to search for a basic and put it onto the battlefield tapped. We have 2 Doomblades, so destroying non-black creatures. 1 Go for the Throat, destroying non-artifact creatures. Both of them have their downsides. I mean, like, Doomblade can't get rid of stuff like Dark Confidant, Olivia Voldaren if Jun's playing it, and there's, like, just a lot of stuff that it can't get rid of in black. Go for the Throat can't get rid of Wormcoil Engine. It can't do anything up against the Robots matchup, the Affinity matchup, so they both have their downsides to them, but at the same time, they're still really good in a lot of matchups, so you still want to kind of have them, and being able to search for any assortment of them with Gifts Ungiven is not bad either. I have 1 Dismember, so -5/-5 to target creature until the end of the turn, 1 generic double Phyrexian black. A playset of Mana Leak to just be able to counter stuff really early on. Whenever it comes into the late game, it's a little bit less impressive, but it's still fairly effective. Being able to counter a spell unless its controller pays 3 is always pretty nice in the early to mid game. We have 1 Timely Reinforcements to be able to gain back life, so up against like the red deck wins type of decks, up against anything that's really hyper aggressive, we can gain back to 6 life if we're at a lesser life total than our opponent. And if we have fewer creatures, we can get 3 1/1s onto the battlefield, which can effectively help us stall out until we can get a Wrath or something. For our Wraths, we have a singleton of each. We have a singleton of Wrath of God, singleton of Damnation, and a singleton of Supreme Verdict. Then I have 2 Unburial Rites to allow us to cast it for 5 to return target creature from our graveyard to the battlefield, or we can flash it in for 4. And 1 singleton Makeshift Mannequin, so return target creature card from your graveyard with a mannequin counter on it. As long as the creature has a mannequin counter on it, it has, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, sacrifice it. So that's really the only downside to it, but it's still at an instant speed, so we can get something back. Especially if like Affinity tries to go and animate like Blink Moth, or Ink Moth actually, and they try to animate and go like Skull Clamp and just bash in, we can go and reanimate our Elesh Norn from our grave at an instant speed, bring it back, and get rid of it, so we don't have to worry about that. And then we have a playset of Gifts Ungiven. So with the gifts, like I mentioned, we can search up for different packages. It's pretty much either in 2 or 4 mode. With 2, we're going to be searching for Unburial Rites and one of our creatures like Elesh Norn, Sphinx of the Steel Wind, or Sun Titan. And we're going to put both of those into the grave because our opponent has to choose them. Or we can go for 4 and we can choose like Hate, like Wrath of God, Damnation, Supreme Verdict, Snapcaster Mage as one of the packages, or like Path to Exile, Doomblade, go for the Throat, Snapcaster Mage, or any like assortment combination, any way you want to have it there. Gifts Ungiven also, after sideboarding, allows us to play around all of the hate that we have with stuff like Stony Silence, Disenchant, Spellskite for some of the matchups. It really just allows us to manipulate how we're playing the game and what our opponent can ultimately do against us, because we're going to be able to find the hate that we need for that 4 mana at an instant speed at the end of our opponent's turn. So they have to really be careful of how they're playing and what they're allowing us to get and what's going into our hand. So the Gifts is just really, really awesome. It's such a fun card to play around in the modern format. It's just absolutely fun. For our land base here, we have 3 Celestial Colonnade. So the Celestial Colonnade is going to be one of our easiest alternate win conditions for the deck, just being able to animate it and turn it into a 4/4 with Vigilance and Flying. So it's just really easy damage from that point on. We have a playset of Marsh Flats, which is going to allow us to search for any of our shock lands that we have, or our plains or swamps as our basic lands. For our shocks, we have 3 Godless Shrine, 2 Hallowed Fountain, and 1 Watery Grave, so 6 of them total. I have 2 Isolated Chapel for other dual lands, a playset of Ghost Quarter for the Tron matchup, where I want to be playing a little bit more early with my land hate than like Tectonic Edge, which would be a little bit more late if our opponent can like nut draw and go off on like turn 3 to start casting Wormcoil Engines and Karns and stuff like that. I want to be able to stop that before that point. So the Ghost Quarter ends up being a just really easy way to deal with Tron in the early game. I'm not as worried about Scape Shift, but Ghost Quarter for Tron is definitely something of a must, and I find myself playing it in just about every outlet that I can in decks. So the Ghost Quarter is pretty nice for that. It can be brought back with Sun Titan, so we can get rid of one of our opponent's lands, play Sun Titan, get back our Ghost Quarter, and just kind of keep on having the hate for any of like the Tron lands, utility lands, man lands, anything like that that they might have. And then for our basics, we have 2 of each, so 2 plains, 2 swamps, and 2 islands. So that's the land base and the main board that we have for our deck. Now let's jump over and take a look at what we have in the sideboard here. So for our sideboard here, we're starting off with 3 Leyline of Sanctity. So the Leyline is awesome up against things like Red Deck Winds, Scape Shift, and even things like Storm as well. If it's in our opening hand, we can begin the game with it on the battlefield. We can't be the targets of spells or abilities that our opponents control. So, especially up against like Storm, them not being able to use Grape Shot against this is going to be a huge setback for them. They have to play off of like Empty the Warrens, so we still have means of getting rid of their creatures in that sense. We still have board wipes, so it's not a problem for us. Up against things like Scape Shift, Valakut's not going to be able to target us, so that's always really, really convenient. Moving on, we have the 2 Chalice of the Void. So Chalice of the Void is a little bit more favorable for me. I really like Chalice of the Void up against any of the matchups that have a really low and tight converted mana cost curve. So if they really try to rely and bank off of a ton of like 1-drops and a ton of 2-drops just to play their entire game, then we're really going to be able to just trump them. With Chalice of the Void, if we're playing up against Infect, X equaling 1 will shut out a decent amount of their creatures, the majority of their buff spells, and any of the giant growth effects. So we can effectively play around that. Up against like Boggle, if we can get X equaling 2, it shuts out. It's going to shut out Core Spirit Dancer, and it's going to shut out a good bit of their good enchantments. They still have 1-drop enchantments, which we still have to play around those. But even like Chalice for a 1 on turn 2 is going to be nice against Boggle. They just really can't play a whole lot. They have to bank off of like Spirit Dancer or enchanting like Dryad Arbor or something like that. But it deals with that. It also deals with Storm. If we go X equaling 2, it's going to cancel out their ability to use Grape Shot. And our opponent can't use Echoing Truth on Chalice of the Void as well, so that's a really huge plus side to it. It also deals with Pyromancer's Ascension, so it's always convenient for that. But up against like red deck wins, it's just a enormously easy way to deal with red deck wins. X equaling 1, and it shuts out like the vast majority of their burn spells and anything that they might have, like Goblin Guides, any cards like that. So it's going to really make it tough for decks with a low converted mana cost curve to function if we have Chalice out, restricting them from casting certain things of a mana cost. We have Engineered Explosives, so with Sunburst enters the battlefield with a charge counter for each color of mana spent to cast it, and 2 mana sack, destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Engineered Explosives. So this is perfect for matchups like aggro, like the red-green aggro, Zoo, anything else that's aggressive, Infect, Boggle. It's just going to be nice against like Affinity as well. You get rid of their like 2-drops, and you can even get rid of all of the like the 0 cost stuff, which isn't really as amazing. But like the 2-drops for Affinity is really where you want to be going with the Engineered Explosive. But it just deals with anything. It's like another board wipe that we have, but it's not just specific for creatures. It just gets rid of every non-land permanent with that converted mana cost equal to the charge counters. So we can get it as high as 3, but usually we're either going for 1 or 2 with it. Sometimes 0 if we're playing up against tokens, and we really, really need the board wiping for the tokens, so we can use that. I have a Singleton Extirpate and a Singleton Surgical Extraction, so I chose to do 1 and 1 of each as opposed to like 2 Surgical Extraction or 2 Extirpate, just because of Gifts Ungiven, not of Ungiven. With Gifts Ungiven, we can use it in one of the packages, and we can get like either or, if depending on how we want to package it up for our opponent to have to choose. But Extirpate and Surgical Extraction are awesome for Graveyard Hate. For anything that is graveyard interacting, we can just get rid of any of the stuff our opponent's trying to interact with, like Loam, Dredge, any type of Dredge that's going to play off of like Loam or any other cards like that. We just have like a huge setback for them with being able to cast Surgical Extraction or Extirpate, especially Extirpate with Split Second. I have 2 Negate, so counter target non-creature spell, basically up against anything that's really non-creature heavy. Pretty self-explanatory, useful on a lot of different matchups. I have 2 Disenchant, so destroy target artifact or enchantment. Good up against robots, otherwise known as Affinity. Good up against things like Pod, not allowing our opponent to play off of Pod. And anything else that's really like artifact or enchantment heavy. Boggle is really enchantment heavy, so we want to get rid of their enchantments. And then we have a 3-up for Stony Silence, so activated abilities of artifacts can't be activated. Good up against Affinity. It's good up against Tron if they're running a lot of eggs, so we're not going to let them use all of their eggs. Anything with artifacts with activated abilities heavy cards, we're just going to shut them out with Stony Silence, so it's a pretty easy way to get around them. So that is the main board and sideboard that we have here for Esper Gifts. If you guys enjoyed the deck tech, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more deck techs and other Magic the Gathering videos. The entire deck list is down below where you guys can check it out and use it as a reference, and be sure to check out all of the decks that I have in the playlist in the description below as well, where you guys can see the whole archive of decks. Until next time, guys, have yourselves a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day.